Ready whenever.
Okay, hello. We're going to talk about the gait cycle. So the gait cycle has two phases. It has the stance phase and it has the swing phase. Within the stance phase, there are 5 events. And within the swing phase, there are 3 events. So let's begin. The first event is heel strike. When heel strike occurs, you have your tibialis anterior isometrically contracting to keep that foot, that ankle, in neutral dorsiflexion. The tibialis anterior is innervated by the deep peroneal nerve. At the knee, the quads are eccentrically contracting to put that knee in slight flexion. And at the hip, and that's the femoral nerve that innervates the quads. And at the hip, your glute max is isometrically contracting to keep that hip neutral. Then you go into foot flat, or flat foot. Here, the tibialis anterior is eccentrically contracting, keeping that foot in dorsiflexion, but keeping it from going forward too much. At the knee, same thing is happening. The quads are eccentrically contracting, keeping that knee following, but just slightly. And at the hip, the glute max now is eccentrically contracting, just trying to control that hip movement, not happening too fast. Now we're at mid-stance. At mid-stance, you are most unstable. So your center of gravity is at its highest point and at its most lateral point. So here we have nothing really happening at the knee, but at the ankle, now we have the gastroc involved. The gastroc is eccentrically contracting just to keep from too much forward movement and keep that dorsiflexion from being too much as it's getting ready to move into plantar flexion. At the hip, we have the glute max. Now it's concentrically contracting, starting to extend that hip. But you also have the glute med, which is isometrically contracting to prevent that hip drop on the other leg. Now we have heel off. At heel off, of course, we've got that gastroc innervated by the tibial nerve that is concentrically contracting as it's putting that ankle in plantar flexion. The knee is just kind of going along for the ride. No muscles are really ignited at this point. The hip, we now have those hip flexors like the iliopsoas eccentrically contracting to prevent too much forward movement yet. Now we have toe off. Again, the gastroc is concentrically contracting, putting that foot further into plantar flexion. Not too much happening at the knee still. At the hip, the iliopsoas is now concentrically contracting as it's beginning to think about moving that foot forward and that hip forward. Next, we have initial swing or early swing. And that is where the tibialis anterior is now going to become involved again. It's going to be concentrically contracting as it's putting that foot back into dorsiflexion so you don't trip. The knee is following along as before. No muscles really engaged yet at the knee. In the hip, you have your iliopsoas, your hip flexors, still concentrically contracting as it's flexing and moving forward. Let me back up here. Mid-swing is the next event. And mid-swing, you have that tibialis anterior still putting that foot in dorsiflexion, but now it's isometrically doing so. The knee is still following along. And at the hip, the iliopsoas, the glute max now is waking up. And the glute max is eccentrically keeping that hip from moving too forward. And finally, we have the terminal swing. And at the terminal swing, we have at the ankle that tibialis anterior in its isometric contraction, having that foot in neutral dorsiflexion. At the knee, we now have the hamstrings finally involved, and they are keeping that knee from going too far forward and making that tibia take the brunt of the load. And at the hip, we have that glute max concentrically contracting. I think I got it all.